Great. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. So my mother used to say, the deep sleep of the just, and she was a woman of letters. So I was only later come to learn that that was a euphemism for death. So if you're looking for a challenge, take on cybersecurity as part of your role. Burkenda, if you want to just jump to the agenda, high level, just cover a little bit about the scope and breadth of the Port Authority's operations, a little bit about our regulatory framework, and really get on to the meat of the discussion today, which is how do we protect a multimodal bi-state public authority? What are the threats? What protections do we have in place? How is that working? And then last, a little bit about suggestions of what you can do to protect yourself and your organization. And obviously, I'll leave time for questions. So we're going to quickly go through the next few slides to talk about the Port Authority. And I think my team got a little overzealous. There's like 6 slides about the Port Authority, which I won't try to cover all of it, but I think it's helpful at least to understand some of the outside regulatory pressures that we have. So we were sort of the prototype of a public authority formed in 1921, essentially to regulate traffic along the New York Harbor. And we've grown into kind of all these operations that we talked about: air, land, rail, and sea. From a governance perspective, the Port Authority reports to a board of commissioners, 12 of them, 6 of whom are appointed by the governor of New Jersey, 6 are appointed by the governor of New York, and then the operations are overseen by an executive director, Rick Cotton, who I report to. Next slide. And we're just going to try and bomb through these quickly. So high level, our facilities are air, land, rail, and sea. So the major airports, JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. The crossings of the Hudson River are the land, the bridges and the tunnels, and the bus terminal, the seaports, and then the rail that covers the PATH train system that connects Newark to Midtown and Lower Manhattan. We're an organization of about 8,000 employees, about 10,000 consultants. We have a $32 billion 10-year capital plan, rebuilding JFK now, 3 terminals under construction right now. We just finished LaGuardia, and we finished the first terminal at Newark, and 1 down, 2 to go, as we say. Next slide, please. I've talked a little bit about the airports. The big ones, JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark, we serve 128 million passengers last year. And we've actually just recently announced that we've exceeded our 2019 passenger volume, which is great. Obviously has a huge economic impact to the region, the New York, New Jersey region, generating a lot of economic activity. Next slide, please. The tunnels, the Holland and the Lincoln Tunnel. The Lincoln Tunnel is actually one of the world's busiest passenger tunnels. The George Washington Bridge, the 14 lanes of traffic, one of the busiest bridges in the world, if not the busiest. And then I mentioned the bus terminal. We serve 260,000 passengers daily through the bus terminal. Our crossings combined of the Hudson River is about 120 million annual Easy Pass transactions. Next slide. On the rail, I talked a little bit about the PATH train system. In any other market, we would be a pretty good-sized rail operation, 42 million passengers. It's about 60% of what we were handling pre-pandemic. But compared to the MTA, we're a really tiny little railroad. Next slide, please. I think the only nuance is that we're governed by the FRA, the Federal Rail Operations, because we cross state lines. And then the seaports that we originally were organized around, we're officially the 2nd busiest port in the US. For a couple of months there, we bested our rivals on the West Coast, the Port of LA and Port of Long Beach. We were, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, et cetera. Because of the investments that we've made in our infrastructure and the rail operations that support the ports. we've been able to continue to expand that. And we handled 9.4 million TEUs. A TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. Containerization actually started at Port Newark in the late 50s, early 60s, and has a huge, obviously, impact on our operations. Next slide. So yeah, on our mission. So really, it's all about keeping the region moving. We have a set of priorities that we focus on in order to achieve that. Safety and security being our number one priority. Execution of the capital plan, and focusing on modernizing our customer experience, not forgetting as we're doing all this construction that people use these facilities day to day. And sustainability being a recent thing, we just released our net zero plan to get to zero emissions net by 2050. We're on target for a 50% milestone by 2030. And then lastly, becoming an employer of choice. So an organization that grows, retains, and attracts the top talent in the region. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, yeah. So regulatory framework, I mentioned a little bit about we have to deal with a lot of federal agencies, FAA, FRA. We work with the Coast Guard, the Federal Highway Administration for our roads and tunnels. Next slide, I'll skip over the next two. DEP, obviously, because of our impact on the environment with the waterways and roadways. And then we have our local partners, our sister transportation agencies, NJ Transit, MTA, and then the cities that we operate in, City of Newark, City of Elizabeth, Bayonne, of course, New York City, etc. Next slide, please. Said I was going to try and burn through these quickly. They got a little crazy. So given the broad scope that we have, given the impact and the visibility that we have, I think it's really critical that we focus on protecting the most critical assets, which are things that involve public safety, number one, the public trust, revenue, and then the personal information of the traveling public and our employees. And so we categorize the things that we're trying to protect, the systems and the data around our business applications, which include, financial systems, HR systems, internet access, email, the police and the security technologies, CCTV, license plate readers, body cameras, police body cameras, which are just now rolling out. We have an 1,800 member police force that we support as well. The industrial control systems and the operational technologies related to, airfield lighting, train control systems, and then Internet of Things, which I include in like tolling operations, weigh scales, thermostats, cash registers, everything related to that. All these systems process, manage, and then in some cases store sensitive information, including personally identifiable information, PCI data, which is credit card information, and then HIPAA. So it's a huge obligation that we are entrusted with. Next slide, please. So I don't think it's news to anybody that in terms of cybersecurity, the threat profile continues to evolve. And I would kind of go back to a point about 3 years ago when the NSA was compromised, and basically the toolkit for everything that NSA used to exploit systems in other countries was compromised and put on the dark web. That combined with cryptocurrency created this environment where there is now a malware as a service business. And these are real businesses. I think Gartner estimated the growth is around 10 to $20 billion is the current value of the dark market. And these are businesses that are really designed for financial gain. They have recruiting operations. They have benefits plans for their employees. They have HR departments. They recruit students out of college. And within 3 or 4 years, the people are making 7 figures. So it's a real business. I think that combined with Colonial Pipeline, the incident where the fuel lines were shut down for a period of 2 weeks on the Northeast, impacting fuel and gasoline up and down the East Coast. really raise the awareness level of executives about the fragility of IT and OT systems and that connectivity. So there's been a lot of progress. I'm not saying that that's not an issue, but I think the fact is that the velocity of attacks has increased. And I think artificial intelligence has certainly helped to accelerate that, increasing both the quality and the ease with which someone can launch a cyber operation against an organization such as ourselves. And I think the nature of the impact has also changed. So it used to be that you were protecting your resources with a strategy of you would restore operations in 24 to 48 hours. Worst case, build up servers from bare metal, restore from backup, build the systems, bring them back online. The goal of the types of attacks that we're seeing is really organizational immobility. And in some cases, a double ransom opportunity. So, number one, if I'm a threat actor, I'm going to try and knock out your operations. But two, if I can steal and exfiltrate data, I'm also going to ransom the ability to disclose that out to the public. So, I'm going to get you to pay me twice. Next slide. So, our response to this type of threat environment has been to create a program that really is around four pillars: defense in depth, employee engagement, training and education, and vendor engagement. And I don't know, break each of these down for you, but in terms of a defense in depth, this is a strategy that was adopted from physical security models where you have one layer of defense and then another layer on top of it for anything that gets through the first layer, and then another layer after that for anything that gets through the second layer, and so on and so forth. So it started really with network and endpoint protection, has moved into the realm of what we now call zero trust, which is to say that you can no longer assume that someone will simply stop at the perimeter. You have to assume that they have access and are able to move laterally on your network. So now we're back to how do we protect the most valuable assets that we have? And I'll tell you, that's been a struggle in a government agency to implement a zero trust model. And then we also have an incident response plan. So when an incident occurs, we actually go through a quarterly exercise where each quarter we pull out our incident response plan. We run through it with a different line of business, in some cases, multiple lines of business. We have an external organization that helps facilitate that exercise. And we take the lessons learned back from the end of the exercise, usually a half day. We'll do a hot wash at the end, see if there are any changes or updates that we want to make to the incident response plan. We almost always learn something, and the business people that we work with certainly have learned something. So the next is employee engagement. A lot of this can seem overwhelming to someone who doesn't have a technical background, and even obviously, if you do have a technical background, my dad used to say, an expert is anybody who knows enough to be worried all the time. And I think it can seem overwhelming to the average person if you combine the technical side of things, which people a lot of times don't understand, with the fear and the confusion that they might have. So, in terms of engagement, our strategy has been to market a communications plan centered around the fact that everyone can be a hero, right? If you give people the opportunity and the ability to report what they see that might be a problem or might be unusual activity that can be investigated, suddenly you can get everybody engaged and involved. And that's been helpful in terms of building a security culture. Obviously, we go through security audits and do compliance checks, but I think the engagement is an essential element of this platform and this program. The third is training and education. It kind of goes hand in hand with the engagement. Obviously, we have an annual training, cybersecurity training program. But I think one of the things that we've implemented that's been really helpful is a monthly phishing campaign where we fish everybody every single month. We started with kind of basic phishing exercises, and our click-through rate was around 18%. We're down about 3-4%, and now we're actually using successful campaigns that have worked elsewhere, and we're just broad brush running it against both our union employees and our non-represented employees as well. So we get a broad look at what how people are thinking about this, and what are they clicking on? When you click on it, you get a message saying you've been successfully phished, and here are the indicators that might have tipped you off that this was a phishing exercise or a phishing campaign. And then in terms of training beyond the employee level, a system administrator level, we try to share and encourage the adoption of best practices in the security realm. When we're talking about OT and industrial control systems, you have a lot of folks who don't have a technical background. And so there's a lot of ground that needs to be covered and bringing their level of technical literacy up to speed. And then the last pillar of the program is on vendor engagement. So, we can do this great cybersecurity program throughout our organization. But the reality is, especially an organization as large and diverse as the Port Authority, we have a heavy reliance on contractors. So it's important for us to really understand who our most critical vendors are and do an assessment about what is the state of their cybersecurity program. Do they have awareness and training campaigns for their employees? Do they have a defense in depth strategy? Are they engaging with their employees? And then prioritizing a deeper dive into those critical vendors who cybersecurity program might be a little bit lacking. Obviously, we've done sort of the basics, putting in contractual language around cybersecurity in our contracts. And then something new that we're embarking upon this year is auditing for compliance of our vendors, making sure that their programs meet the standards that we expect out of our own organization. Next slide, please. So here are some of the top cybersecurity risks and attempted breaches that we're watching. We have a risk register that we maintain specific to our operations that we review quarterly based on, or anytime something new happens in the environment or there's some big news item that comes out. Obviously, the big threats around malware. There shouldn't be anything on this list that is news to people, but I always think about, what is the threat, what are the consequences, and how are we addressing them? So for basic malware, you're looking for data exfiltration, disruption of systems. Your primary defense is around antivirus detection, limiting people's level of access. A lot of organizations have systems that haven't been reviewed recently, and maybe you've got too many system administrators. You got to give people the appropriate level of access. And patch. We're very, very aggressive patching program. The next one is login credential theft or credential harvesting. The threat being unauthorized access, people manipulating data or just outright stealing it. And our primary defenses are, again, training our employees and implementing multi-factor authentication or MFA. Our tools, scan for emails and malicious links all the time, but we're always on the lookout for a well-crafted email and potential, evading some of our means of detection. So we invest heavily in the education again, the monthly tests. And I mentioned before, AI has really increased both the reach and the quality of the types of phishing campaigns that we've been seeing. So it's really something to watch. Ransomware, obviously you want to detect and block that right away. We have tools that are running all the time on our network, looking for indicators of that activity happening in the background, protecting your backups and recoveries. Denial of service attacks, pretty common thing. We saw that early on in 2021 from the Russian Killnet operations attacking our websites. And one thing I would mention, you can't simply think that by moving to a well-known cloud service provider like Microsoft or Amazon, that you're going to avoid a DOS attack. We actually saw people using Microsoft Azure services because it's convenient to initiate the denial of service attack. So it's pretty interesting when you get into these individual events. And then the last and probably the most concerning is an intentional directed attack against a mission critical system. So the goal being to impact our critical operations, take them offline, and then potentially, ransomware for bringing it back online. And our defenses are really our cybersecurity defense tools and services, monitoring for lateral movement across the network, real-time intelligence services that we subscribe to and have folks through security clearances attend briefings on a monthly basis or as needed. And then we just routinely perform software updates on our applications and systems. By the way, we've seen all of these attempts against our specific environment, including the DOS and the phishing and the credential harvesting. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just I think some of the key milestones for our program, which has really sort of been around since 2012 and had really ramped up the last few years, is deploying multi-factor authentication for system access. We rolled it out about 4 years ago. It's actually due for a refresh because in some cases we used SMS or text-based as the second factor. Obviously, if you've been paying attention, that can be compromised. And we've actually seen it compromised for people leveraging unauthorized access to our environment. System owner training and threat vulnerability risk assessments against our industrial control systems is another big milestone for us, really kind of surfacing where we're vulnerable in our operational technology environment or industrial control system environment. The launch of Optech Shield, which is our internally branded collection of people, process, and technology dedicated to protecting our ICS and OT environment. It's a 24/7 operation. We have a lot of active participation, a lot of interest in our organization in expanding that program. Actually, compliance with FAA is the #1 consideration for this year. And then we assess the effectiveness of our cybersecurity training. I think that's important, doing that regularly every month because the threats change every month. And then doing quarterly tabletop exercises and cybersecurity incident simulation. We did our first executive tabletop exercise earlier this year. I think it was a real eye-opener for our executive team. We had our chairman and our executive director and the entire senior staff paid attention for 3 hours on this exercise, and we had a lot of good feedback on it afterwards. Next slide. So what can you do to protect yourself and protect your organization? So, excuse me, sorry, this keep coming up. Obviously, some of this is pretty basic stuff, right? Make sure that you have long, complex passwords. Make sure it's different for each account you have. Use a password manager. Turn on MFA. Make sure your software is up to date. The other thing I would mention is, since the advent of AI, and I think the statistic I saw is we're 24 months away from having an AI generated voice being indistinguishable from its source. So we've already seen campaigns where people are contacted by a bot that is talking to them or calling them seemingly from someone they know, saying, I'm in trouble, I need you to provide a credit card number to the next voice you hear so I can, get out of jail, or I can, make sure I avoid this situation that I'm in, and people fall for it. And so what my spouse and I have instituted is a code word. It's pretty basic, old school technology. It's a word both of us know and are familiar with. Has never been online. We've never spoken it over the phone. So that if we get one of these kind of phone calls that doesn't smell right, we can say, it sounds good. What's the code word? And then we'll know if it's actually us on the other end of the line. It sounds paranoid, I know, but I'm just telling you, if you're prepared, then you can do something. If you're not prepared, then you're kind of left to your own devices. How do you protect your organization? Again, pretty basic stuff here. Penetration testing, do internal testing as well as external. We do that as part of our annual PCI compliance. And by the way, we process about $1.5 billion a year in credit card transactions. So we have a robust program that really, I think, helps advance the cybersecurity program. They work hand in hand together, conducting privacy audits, using, secure web traffic, HTTPS, and move to the updated algorithm for encryption, TLS 1.3, not 1.1. There's still a lot of that floating around, especially with old systems. And then I think the other thing I would put on is, given the potential threats for AI, review the policies and procedures that you have through the frame of an attacker using artificial intelligence. I think the lesson from MGM is that social engineering is alive and well. I mean, that compromise was really all about attackers leveraging the help desk and finding out the one-time password that was used when they reset an account or created new accounts. And then they just sprayed the Active Directory and they got access to the network and implemented their malware program. So the other thing I would say is that if you're on this call, I'm going to sound like, again, a paranoid person. It is not an understatement to say that you are a target. There are people in the world that are looking at your profile, I guarantee, to figure out, well, by global standards, we're all pretty well off. We're rich. So they're going to, first of all, see if there's, a way to directly access our wealth. Secondarily, they're going to look at our networks and how can they use our identity, if they can compromise it, to leverage other people in the network for financial gain. So I tell my executive team all the time, you are a target. You're an important person. You need to think about that all the time, because that will help you think about whether or not you want to click on a link, whether you want to disclose some information to somebody who just called you as a cold call all the time. Next slide. So just some kind of facts from the National Cybersecurity Alliance, sort of interesting things. Only 33% of individuals create unique passwords for all accounts. I myself was compromised in 2010, and it was that when I went to Dashlane, which is the password manager that I have. I have 284 logins that I manage. I not only have a different password, but I also have a different login for every location. And I use my password manager to keep track of it, because it's way more than I can keep track of. Use MFA, we talked about that. Report phishing. So in our monthly phishing campaign, we reported the click-through rate, a new metric that we just started reporting on, and we're going to start telling people, we want you to call in. If you think this is a phishing campaign, we want you to report it. So now I have a metric. The NCA says 47% of participants said they use the reporting capability to report something as a phishing campaign. In our organization, that number is much, much lower, but we want to raise it up. Next slide. So what does the future hold? I mean, obviously, we're going to continue to see growing risks, given what we've seen so far. I think insider threat is probably the next frontier. We have a lot of contractors at our organization, and they tend to access critical data because we're hiring expertise that we don't have in-house. And so they either generate or access this critical data, and it presents an opportunity, and it presents something that needs to be addressed. I've seen campaigns where the insider was actually asked by a threat actor to compromise security and in return a piece of the action, a piece of the take. So that's what we're up against. So then, obviously, as we continue to expand our reliance on new state-of-the-art technology and expanding Internet of Things, it just increases the attack surface, what a threat actor can use to exploit. So for us, our vendors, our customers, our public-private partnerships that we're working with to develop our new airports, really increases the importance of a third-party risk management program. So we're building a program that provides visibility, governance, assessment, and remediation of our critical third-party vendors. Okay, questions?